Today I'm looking at a Yaesu FT-416 2-meter ham radio handy talkie, or HT. A couple of years ago I made a video and posted it about how I replaced the internal memory battery on this radio. And when I did that, I kind of took a battery and I soldered it to some tabs, which really wasn't the ideal way to do it, but it was easier than pulling the whole radio apart. Well, that worked for a little while, but now the battery is dead again, and it probably was, life was shortened a little bit because of, exposure to the extreme heat of trying to solder it to some tabs. The first thing I'll do is remove the antenna from the radio and pop off the battery pack so that I can get at these 4 screws that are on the bottom of the radio here. Okay, with those screws removed, I'll just remove this bottom piece, and you can see that there's some wires attached to it, so I'm just going to let those hang. Try to be careful that I don't pop those out of the solder joints there. And then the next thing I'll do is remove a couple of screws on the back of the case here. With those screws out of the way, the radio should just gently work apart. Okay, what it was stuck on when I was trying to take it apart was actually my original kind of battery fix here. You can see that it's soldered in, and I put some shrink tube or something over it, and that was kind of caught inside the radio, so I had to kind of pry it apart with a little more force than I would have liked. There's these little flexible ribbon cables in here that are kind of delicate, and hopefully I didn't damage those. But at any rate, here's the battery, and now the next step is going to be to peel off this stuff that I put on it. Anyway, the next step that I'm going to take is to remove this inner board here, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 screws on it, I think. Oh, I see. It's attached to this flex board somehow still. I can't quite see what's going on there, but you can see that that flex cable gets larger and turns into another part of the board here, and somehow this is attached. It doesn't look like they're the same board, but it does appear that they are at least glued together somehow. So, okay, this is kind of a mess here the way it is, but as long as I'm careful, I think I'll be okay. The trick is to not rip this flex board at all, and they're usually reasonably durable, but if I flex it too much, the copper traces inside could crack, and those are hard to repair if they do. But what I think I'm going to try and do is, now that I've got this board exposed, the inner board, and I'm trying to show it here without putting too much stress on anything, there's 2 solder connections here, and I can't tell if the camera's showing them right. Yeah, there they are. So these are the 2 connections for the battery. I should be able to just unsolder those and drop in the new battery. But before I do that, I need to try and make sure that I can figure out what the polarity of the battery is here. Okay, so I've cut the old shrink tubing with a knife. Well, maybe I can cut it all the way here. I ended up using a continuity meter just to check the solder tails to the battery to determine which side was the positive terminal and which one was the negative terminal. So what I determined was that the way that the radio is viewed now, the terminal that's closer to the push-to-talk switch is the positive one, and the one closer to the other side of the radio is the negative one. So I can keep that in mind. And I've also, if you can see here, I've marked the circuit board with a little plus sign so that I know. So now what I can do is I can try and desolder this battery. But what's interesting about this is that you can see, I don't know if you can see, but the actual rigid part of the board has a slot cut in it, and the terminals are actually soldered to through holes in the flex portion of the board, which is a little bit unique. So I'll have to be careful trying to desolder this to make sure I don't delaminate any of the circuit board stuff here. This is quite an interesting little board assembly that they've got going here. Okay, so when I last looked at the radio, I was pulling out the old battery, and here's the old battery. You can see I had made a mess of it the last time I worked on this thing, and the tabs ended up coming apart and everything, so that's out of here. And what you can see here is I've got the new battery just placed in, and I had to pick away a lot of this white epoxy that was around the battery, because this was not only holding the battery in place, but it's also holding in the flex board that the battery is mounted to. The flex board actually seems like it wraps around the rigid board here somehow, and the battery solders into that. So I had to pick away some of that to be able to get the new battery through the holes. So I've got this in, and I've got it oriented right. Before I pulled out the old battery, I marked the rear of the circuit board here, and it may not be evident in this lighting here, but I put a plus sign next to the terminal for the positive side of the battery. So once I put this back in, I know I've got it oriented right. Okay, I'm going to attempt to solder this. Not sure how well it's going to show up in this camera. My good camera is indisposed at the moment. Okay, I was able to get my good camera going again here, and you can see I've got the battery soldered in to the back of this flex board where this access cavity is. And if I flip it over without breaking anything, here you can see the battery is here, and I just taped it in to hold it while I was soldering, but I'll take this piece of tape off. Here you can see that I've got the Kapton tape wrapped around the battery to prevent it from shorting anything when it gets reassembled into here, and I've got this board screwed back down with its screws. The two screws up here were fine pitch thread, and these were coarse thread. I think these are going into plastic, and these are going into some sort of metal. Here's the radio all put back together. I got the 4 screws in the bottom cover put in, and I've got the 2 screws that went in the back near the top put back in. Now I actually fired this up last night. This is actually the next morning now, and made sure it was working and everything, but I didn't have the camera on then. And you can see what I've got here is I've got a couple of leads connected to the battery clip on the radio, and that's because the battery that I have with the radio is currently dead, and I don't have the charger for it, and this didn't have any convenient places to clip to, and I didn't have a connector to fit the battery charge hole there. So I've opted to do this just temporarily. And again, I fired this up last night and programmed something in the radio's VFO, and I let it sit overnight, and now when I turn it on, you can see that that still has retained its memory in the VFO. Well, I guess that's it for this repair. You can see I've got the battery and the antenna clip back on the radio. I'm going to return it back to its owner and let that person charge the radio up and program all the memories in it and put it through a real test to see if the memory stays retained for more than 12 hours or so. Hopefully it will. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. Hopefully it was helpful or at least entertaining.